Noswaith dda, a chroeso I ddigwyddiad cyntaf Gwyl Crime Cymru eleni. Alice Hawkins, cadeirydd yr wyl dwi, a dwi'n falch iawn i'ch groesawu heno. Good evening, and welcome to the first event of this year's Crime Cymru Festival. I'm Alice Hawkins, Festival Chair, and I'm delighted to welcome you to what's going to be a wonderful festival opener. So without further ado, I'll bow out and hand you over to my friend and fellow Crime Cymru member, best-selling author of the Nathan Sutherland series set in Venice, Gwynne Jones. Good evening, Phil. Noswaith dda.
Noswaith dda, Alice. A very warm welcome. Croeso everyone to Gwyl Crime Cymru 2023. I'm Gwynne Jones. It's lovely to be here in my dad's spare room where we hope the Wi-Fi is strong. And I'm delighted to be joined by David Baldacci. David, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. For those of you, well, where do we start with David? He has written over 40 best-selling novels. He has been represented in Hollywood and on television. He has also written books for children and for young adults. We have about 50 minutes to chat. Getting through David's career is going to be a little bit like the Monty Python Summarised Proust competition, but we'll do the very best we can. And I'll start by saying, David, first of all, congratulations. It's publication week on Simply Lies.
Thank you very much. It's always wonderful to get a new book out there, particularly with brand new characters. And even though I've been doing this for a long time and I've gotten a lot of books under my belt, it's always a little nerve-wracking with the new book coming out, new characters, and you want people to like them, you want people to read the book, and you know, it's like my first novel over and over again. The butterflies are always there.
Yeah, it never gets stale, I think, does it? It never gets stale. Yeah. I don't want to give any spoilers. I've been very lucky to have an advance review copy of this. It's terrific. You don't need my recommendation, people, because you're going to buy it anyway. But David, remaining spoiler-free as much as possible, could you tell us a little bit about Simply Lies?
So the main protagonist is a woman named Mickey Gibson. That's her real name, not short for Michelle or anything. She used to be a detective in New Jersey. She has 2 little kids. Her husband ran out on her and abandoned her. So she had to move to Virginia to be near her retired parents to get a little help with the kids. And now she works only online. It's sort of an online sleuth. She works for a big company called Pro-I, and her job is to go and find assets that really wealthy people have tried to hide so they don't have to pay the tax man. And one day she's called out to look at this mansion where she was told this rich person had cheated a bunch of creditors. They wanted to do the inventory in the mansion to find out if there's anything there that creditors could use to pay off the debts. And she finds a dead body, you know, in the secret room in the library. And she's actually suspected of having killed the person. So sort of her suburban mom life, where she does all of her stuff online, just gets shot straight to hell. She's in this nightmare now. And her antagonist is another woman who really she only meets for a lot of the book only online or on the phone. And I did that because so much of our life is online now. You know, we don't communicate face to face like we're doing right here, you know, on a Zoom. We do it through email, text, Instagram, and there's this anonymity on there that allows people who would never do bad things otherwise, they do. You know, they feel like they're liberated to be somebody else, be many different people. And I just wanted to sort of capture the essence of how we live our lives now in this new book.
Terrific, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, first thing, I thought the domestics of this were absolutely charming. They were delightful. They were genuinely funny. And then, as you said, it's like a switch is pulled, and all of a sudden, yeah, it's the person, the almost normal, regular person in an extraordinary situation. And what do you do when you're put into that situation? I think it's very interesting what you said about the whole cyber issue, the way people behave online. We've gone through 3 years of that with COVID, 2.5 years of that with COVID. And you see people behave in a way that they would not behave in real life. It's almost like Jekyll's potion, liberating you from any sort of societal norms and just reducing you to the basest you can actually be.
It is. It's a perfect storm for bad behavior and even violent behavior. And we are certainly seeing that in the United States. We were flooded with disinformation. We had, you know, a major news organization that paid almost $1 billion a couple of days ago because they had lied about the 2020 election and riled up a lot of people who went on to do violent things. And it's almost like the id, ego, and super ego. It's like all around us now in the cyber world. And you're exactly right. People, when they find out, some of the people have been doing these heinous things online, you find out they're relatively normal people, some of them. And you wonder why, this anonymity allows people to do what they do. I think it absolutely, as you said, goes right to the baser instincts of humankind. If they think they can get away with it, no one will know they did something bad. There will be no consequences. They're going to continue to do it. And that's why, social media, the world that we live in now, look, when Facebook and all the others came out, it was like a fun place to post your pet pictures, or say something funny on Twitter. And now it's all been weaponized. And I only think, 100 years from now, where archaeologists start digging back into what happened, and they were like, who in the world thought that Facebook would have brought down Western civilization? So it's crazy times. It's absolutely crazy times.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say you're a person who's genuinely interested in technology?
I'm interested to the degree that I want to know how much it's going to impact me and the rest of the world. We have this AI, ChatGPT, and everybody's saying, well, they don't need authors anymore because the AI can just write books and plays and screenplays and television series without you. It was interesting. My son, when the first AI came out about 5 or 6 months ago, he said, hey, Dad, come over here, look at this. So he opened his laptop, he typed in a request, and it said, come up with a plot that sounds like a David Baldacci novel. He typed that request into the AI platform. And like 3 seconds later, there was a whole page, and I read through it. And it sounded like a novel, a David Baldacci novel. But here's the interesting thing. Here's the difference. It sounded like a David Baldacci novel that I had already written.
Interesting.
Not one that I would conceive in the future. Because one thing that software platforms can't, it's not in their database is what is going to inspire me tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personal experience I'm not going to have tomorrow. So I know that I have to know about technologies because it impacts our lives every day. I'm never going to know enough, about it like a 20-year-old would, who's, they can do things with a computer and a phone. I don't even know. If I have a problem, my kids are grown. So if I have a problem with anything, I just call them. Can you fix this? Because I have no clue and no desire to find out how it works. But it is important to know, and particularly what dominates our lives right now are social media and these iterations off of it. Now we have AI to worry about. We're going to create an army of smarter, stronger things that one day may rise up against us. I mean, I've seen that movie. We've all seen that movie.
We've all seen that movie, but yes.
So who knows? But it's there. It's important. We have to know about it.
It's there, and we never expected this to happen in our lifetimes, perhaps, but there we are. Here
we are. Yes, we have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go back a little bit, way before chatbots, way even before Facebook. I'm sure lots of people ask you about when did you decide that you wanted to become a writer, but what I'd like to know is when you were a young guy, when you were a kid, what are your first reading memories? What do you remember reading?
I do. The first book I ever really have a recollection of reading and understanding and really enjoying was a book called The Magic Squirrel. It was based on a Russian parable. And the connection that I had that book was that when I had to be away from it, when I had to go to school, I was aching to get back to the story. And I would get back to it. I would curl up in a chair and just read as much and as long as I could. I think that moment I was 6 or 7. My love of reading, I think, was born during that one book experience. And it so moved me that years later, I went back and found online a first edition of The Magic Squirrel. And I read it again. And I had a totally different experience because I'm older, more mature, and I could look at it from a different perspective. I would not be an author today if I had not been a reader as a young kid, I don't think, because my love of writing equates to my love of reading. I'm a writer today because I love being surrounded by words. I love reading the words of others and being inspired and informed by them. But I also love creating my own words for people, to being inspired and informed by what I have to say. That communication is the most powerful skill a human being has, because it directly takes what's up here, which is our most powerful part of any human being, our brain, and causes us to be who we are and allows us to communicate that to other people. And we do it most forcefully through writing. The things that have moved the world, spoken words can move the world, but writing has a permanence that people can go back to over and over again and analyze and reanalyze and bring back up and share with other people in a way that we don't have any other substitute for that. So words have changed the world and will continue to do so because humankind have always been inspired by that.
I love Stephen King's description of it, where he says writing is a time machine. In his book on writing, he says, I'm writing this in the year 1999. You might be reading this in 20, 30 years' time. And I'm telling you about a tablecloth with a rabbit sitting on it. Now close your eyes and imagine this tablecloth with a rabbit. And here's me telling you about it. And I'm communicating what's in my head to your head, thousands of miles away and 30 years in the future. And I think there's something utterly inspiring about that.
Well, it is. I mean, humanity grew up telling stories around the fire. That's how we communicated our histories for a long period of time before there was any ability to print books. So that oral history is handed down, and now we're then translated into the written word. But it really is, it's the most powerful thing that we have. And I tell people, young people today in particular, who don't think that they need to have strong writing skills because they're in technology or computers or whatever that. I said, no, the way you convince people of anything most forcefully is by using words. And you can speak them, but I think the written word is the strongest of all because you can set a time and place, you can set a mood and an atmosphere, and you can convey information in a powerful way that allows them, the reader, to look at your words, ruminate on it, and come up with their own conclusions about what you meant and be inspired by it or not. It's a permanence to it. It's like taking your brain and spreading it around the world permanently. So people will always have an example of it to pull up and think about. And that's what a book essentially is. It's me or whoever the writer is. Long after I'm gone, people will still have that piece of me to refer back to. And this is what he was thinking, as Stephen King said 30 or 40 years ago. This is what his perspective was of this particular thing. And that's quite interesting.
Yeah, terrific. Do you remember, I imagine you started thinking fairly soon after The Magic Squirrel that telling stories to people is a pretty neat thing to do. Do you remember when you first started writing? Do you remember your first story?
Yeah, I do. It was my mom when I was a little kid. Back then, there were no computers, no internet. So we just played outside all day. We had adventures in my neighborhood with all the neighborhood kids. And my job, I loved it, was that I was sort of came up with all of our adventures. I would sort of construct the battles we were going to fight, the damsels in distress we were going to save, the journeys we were going to go on. Everybody had their roles and their lines and all that. And I loved that. And I just never stopped talking. I was just on and on and on, 24/7. And my mom gave me a blank page journal when I was eight years old. And she said, honey, I know you like to read and you're always talking about all these stories. Why don't you try writing some of them down? And I did. And as soon as my pen hit the paper, it was like this epiphany of, oh my God, I can translate what's here to there for all eternity. And I never looked back from that moment. I started writing whatever I could possibly write. And the first story that I wrote was about sort of generations, about this guy who gets on a train, and we don't know where he came from, where he's going, really who he is. And he sits down next to this very elderly woman, and come to find out that this might be his grandmother, his long lost grandmother. He just happened to go on this train. There's his grandmother. And as you go through it, and it was rudimentary language. I wasn't that old, but the key was that, at the end of the story, it wasn't his grandmother. He wasn't really on the train, and he'd actually died in a plane accident before he got on the train. So this is all sort of, mystical. But that was what my imagination was like. I wanted to take the real world and turn it upside down. I didn't want to have any parameters. I wanted to be able to do what I wanted to do. And years later, I went back to my mom and I said, Mom, my God, what a gift you gave me that day. Thank you so much. And she said, honey, I'm so glad it's worked out for you. But quite frankly, I just wanted to shut you the hell up. The old Southern phrase is, you'd gotten on my last nerve, boy.
A last act of desperation, yes.
Very much so, but still. And the other gift they gave to us I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the old capital of the Confederacy in the 60s and 70s. I grew up in a heavily racist, heavily segregated society. When I went to college, every day I passed those enormous monuments to the Confederate generals. And I could have grown up with a very different perspective on life. I could have grown up with a perspective that, the way it was back then in the old days was just fine. And I grew up with a lot of people who still feel that way to this day. What saved me were books. My parents took us, my brother and sister and I, to the library every week, and I checked out as many books as I possibly could. And I learned about people who didn't look like me or pray like me or dress like me or speak like me, but we were all human beings who deserved respect and empathy and support. And so books literally saved me from what could have been a very different life, because I never had an opportunity to travel outside of Richmond. The old Mark Twain saying is, Mark Twain was the most traveled person of his generation. He said, travel is fatal to prejudice. Well, I didn't have the ability to physically travel, but everyone out there has the ability to travel the world through books. And I encourage everyone to do so.
There's a wonderful, wonderful line in a song by the Welsh rock band, the Manic Street Preachers, and it's "Libraries gave us power."
Libraries are the last bastion of democracy, as far as I'm concerned. They're under attack right now in my country. I can't believe it, but here we are again. Book banning, book burning, telling people what they should read or think. But that library books, I read a magazine article a number of years ago, and it said, when dictators take over countries, they have a little checklist. And one of the very first things they do is they close all the libraries, because libraries represent diversity of opinion, thought, and freedom, which is what, authoritarians do not want. So when I say that libraries are the last bastion of democracy and freedom, I really mean it. It's exactly what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to move forward a few years. I think people maybe think that you were an overnight success, but as with everybody, it takes you 10 years to become an overnight success. Absolute Power was your debut novel, which was published, I think, in your mid-30s. Yeah. But you had been writing, of course, you'd been writing, until Absolute Power. And you were holding down a job working in law in Washington, D.C., I believe. How did you juggle that? Because I imagine that must have been, mentally and physically, draining energy-wise. And then you get back home and you've got to write. How did you possibly find that?
It was actually a relief for me, because I would spend all day working and writing things that other people were telling me that I needed to write, and working on cases. And so when I got home, that was the time for me to write what I wanted to write. And I have to say that if I didn't have that other side of my life, I think I would have just gone completely nuts as a lawyer, because I was a trial lawyer, a solicitor, a barrister. And so every day it was like I was a gladiator in a pinstripe suit. And my job was to destroy the other side. Their job was to make my life as miserable as possible. But when I would write, I'd go home and write in the middle of the night. And it was liberating. It was a sense of freedom. It was a sense of, you still have that part of you, even though you make your living doing that. This is still a big core of who you are. Never forget that. So it was a relief for me to be able to do that. And it helped me mentally in every other type of way. I would run down, after my family went to bed, I would run down the steps to my little cubbyhole and just pick up my pen, and off we went. And it was, back then, it was very cheap therapy. I don't think I could have afforded real therapy.
I think you're one of those writers who can write anywhere. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Planes, trains, automobiles, it doesn't really matter. I have this little Greek place near my office in Northern Virginia, and I go in there a lot for lunch, and 50 people around eating, and I'm sitting back in the corner with my laptop or my pen and pad. And I've written a lot of great stuff, in the middle of all these people eating and drinking, because, it doesn't really matter. The only perfect place to write, it doesn't involve a physical space. The only perfect place to write is here. If you're in the zone here, you can put it down on paper or on a screen, anywhere you are. And I remember I went in there one time and I saw my table. It's not really my table, but the one I usually sat at, and there's somebody there, they were eating. I was like, okay. So I sort of slow walk my order, and I figured by the time I got my food, maybe they'd leave. And they did, but somebody else went over there and got the table. So I was, oh, great, I'll just take it back to the office. And as I was preparing to pay and leave, somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around. It was the guy who was at the table. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Baldacci, I cleaned your desk off. You ready to go?" He actually worked there. And this little Greek place, I guess I go there so much. Now they have a plaque above that table that says David Baldacci's remote office.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So no, I don't have to have the same place to write. I don't have to have, sit at the same desk. For me, it's all about, if the words are there and they want to come out, I have to be ready to do it wherever I happen to be.
Do you have the pad by the side of the bed in case the idea comes at 2 o'clock in the morning?
And if it's a really good idea and it's really forceful, I get up out of bed. I just go to my office, and I just start right away, because sometimes that first inspiration is really difficult, one, to recreate later when you're awake, or two, even to sort of decipher from notes you might have made in the middle of the night. So if it's something really compelling, I just like to get it out.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So you were in Washington and you were working on the manuscript that became Absolute Power. How much did your work feed into that, and how much did the city itself feed into that?
A lot. I mean, I had explored Washington, D.C. from, corner to corner. And in my law practice, I met a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, a lot of people in government, a lot of high-powered lawyers, business people. So I at that point with Absolute Power, I was writing about a world that I knew a lot about, which was comforting because, I did some research for the novel. Every novel you have to do research for. I didn't have to do as much, which was good. At that point, I didn't have a lot of spare time. I had a family, I had a full-time job. So I really did sort of lean on the stuff that I had learned as a lawyer, being a lawyer 10 years in Washington, D.C. And it dovetailed nicely, with the story I was trying to tell. My law office was near the White House. The book is about the president and a murder and a burglar and a cover-up. And I'd been a student of history my whole life. And I remember reading about the Kennedy years, Camelot, and he had all these affairs and trysts with people, some in the White House, some in underground tunnels connecting the White House to another building. Always while Jackie was out of the country, out of the city. But what struck me, I wanted Absolute Power to answer a question. And the question was, what if something really bad happened during one of these trysts? What would people connected to the president, how far would they go to make sure they could survive? Because if the president goes down, it's not just one person going down, it's thousands of careers tied to that one person that go into the toilet as well. So I wanted to see how far could I push people who were actually good people, Secret Service, their job is to protect the president. Well, in this case, they had a very difficult choice to make. That life shall never end is the rule, no matter what he may be doing at the moment. So Absolute Power was my answer to that question. How far would people go?
Do you think it's uncomfortably prescient given the event of the last couple of years?
My God, I've heard from a lot of people that say, can you tell me, the winning lottery numbers now? But it's that wasn't my intent. But my formula is pretty simple. I look at the world, and then I throw in a few what ifs. And if those what ifs occur, what would the result be? I try to think outside of that envelope we all live in, reality. And okay, well, that's great. This is reality. But what if X, Y, and Z happens together? Then what does reality become? And that's really the inspiration for a lot of my fiction. It's answering questions that, I want to have answered, that people typically don't really think a whole lot about. But I think a lot of great books have been written because an authors answered a question through the use of their own book.
Yeah, I like that. One of our earliest panels at Gwyl Cymru this year, tickets are still available, is a panel on Saturday morning about text to film or text to TV. Did you have much input into Absolute Power, or was it very much hands off, Hollywood knows best?
Yeah, I have several mantras about that. I've got a bunch of film projects in development now, and I've had a bunch done. I have one rule of thumb, and I will give it out freely to all the writers out there. If you ever have your stuff adapted, no matter what the contracts say, you have the rights to. At the end of the day, you're not going to be making the film. Other professionals are. But here's the thing. I never want to have so much control over TV or film projects such that if it fails, they can blame and then sue me. And trust me, they will. So I have my little inputs. I can do notes on the script. I can have comments on the dailies they send me. I can have input on the casting, but ultimately they're the decision makers. So with Absolute Power, I worked with Bill Goldman, the screenwriter. We came down, we met, we worked together some on the script. He was a script writer. He was just, trying to get some thoughts and stuff for me. I learned a lot from Bill. But ultimately, the best defense for a writer, they want to see the work adapted well. That keeps in the spirit of the source material. It's never going to be the same. These are apples and oranges. But here's the thing. Before I sign any deal, I always meet with the filmmakers and I probe them about what's your vision for the characters? How do you see this evolving? What do you think the first season is going to look like? What do you think seasons 2 or 3 will look like? Or how do you see the first act of the film coming out? How do you want to establish the character in people's minds? If their vision is close to mine, and they seem like they really respect the characters, and they wouldn't do anything to rip the heart of the characters out, then that I would be more leaning to sign off on that deal. And then my best protection is going forward. At least I've had that conversation. I've had that meeting. And I know because I've had meetings where people have come in and say, yeah, we want to do this with this character. And I was like, oh my God, no, never will that happen on my watch. And then what happens? I don't do the deal. So I would encourage people always have that preliminary and ask them what their vision is. I forget the plot and all this stuff. What is the vision for the source material? What is the vision for how much of the respect and depth are you going to have the characters translated into there? Is the main character in the book going to be in the film? Because in Absolute Power, that was not the case. The young lawyer that was sort of the hero of the film never made it into the film, into the book, into the film. So those are the questions you'd ask up front. That is the best protection you can have, because I don't care what's in the contract. You can have all the rights in the world in the contract. As a lawyer, I can tell you that I litigated hundreds of these cases. Okay, you sign a contract, gives you all these rights, and then they make the film and they didn't abide by the terms of the contract. Okay, great. Go sue Warner Brothers. Go sue Paramount and say goodbye to your life.
Yeah. You'll never work in this town again. Yeah.
We'll work in this town again. Trust me, we would never.
But you've actually worked were you executive producer or co-producer on the King and Maxwell series?
I was, yes. I think I was a co-producer on King and Maxwell. Now, the TV series we have in development going forward now, I'm always an EP, executive producer. I've adapted one of my own books for film, Wish You Well, one of my non-thrillers. Yeah. The screenwriter on that one. So I've been on a lot of film sets. I work with a lot of great people. It's fascinating to me, how they pulled it all together. And again, I get it. If your book is adapted and you don't like how it was done, I have a remedy for that. For every project I've sold to Hollywood and they send you the check, take a picture of it. And then when they do something that really pisses you off, pull the check out, look at all the numbers on that check, and I guarantee you're going to feel better, and don't let that rule your life. Just move on. We're novelists, they're filmmakers, they do their thing, we do our thing.
Mm-hmm. How do you find screenwriting? How did you find the experience of screenwriting as opposed to being a novelist?
It was far more rushed. I remember we were shooting in a rural area, and I had an Academy Award-winning actress, Ellen Burstyn, in full costume, waiting in front of the camera because we had Superstorm Sandy had come through, and we lost 2 days of shooting, which meant that we missed some locations we were supposed to shoot at. And then there were some holes in the plot, and we couldn't get those locations back. So I'm in the middle of the farmyard on a wooden table with roosters and chickens flying all around me on a laptop, rewriting a page of dialogue for Ellen Burstyn, to perform, and she's waiting for it. So that's a little bit of pressure. But I have to say that here's the key difference between writing novels and writing screenplays. When you're writing a novel, you're it. You are the end of the inspiration. Either it lives or dies with you. As I was writing that page of dialogue for Ellen Burstyn, and I'm like, no. You don't need to do all of this. You have 7 lines you've given her here, but you have a woman who's one of the greatest actresses of her generation. Let her do what she does. So I cut of the 7 lines of dialogue, I cut it down to 2. And then I just let Ellen do what Ellen wonderfully does. So with a script, always remember when you're crafting it, you're not Atlas. You don't have the whole world on your shoulders. You have other people there who are going to carry some of the load. And those other 5 lines that I left out, how did Ellen do that? Through her expression. That's all she needed. I didn't need her to say these things. You could see her thinking and feeling them. That's the major difference. You don't have that latitude with a novel.
Are you good at juggling? Are you good at keeping lots of balls, lots of ideas in the air at once?
Yeah. And I think maybe that's sort of an attribute that I gained when I was practicing law, because I had lots of cases that I was juggling and I need to know everything and all of them all at once. And I might not have looked at one for a whole week, and then I have to go to court for something. And then I just have to slam that knowledge again into my head and go off and do what I need to do. I try to be very organized in the collection of my materials and keeping things separate and working on it methodically. I like to be organized in that so I can be mercurial and sometimes disorganized and chaotic in the writing. I don't want my writing to sound like a neatly outlined plot, where everything seems to flow together very nicely and make a lot of sense, because life doesn't do any of that. Life doesn't make sense often. Things don't flow together neatly. Endings are not done up with a nice little bow, and we all walk away happy. So your writing shouldn't reflect that either. Things happen in a novel, particularly the sorts of novels that I write, mystery novels. People die, people are being investigated, trying to hunt down a criminal. It's a dirty, gritty business, and to authentically replicate that in a novel, that's the perspective you should hold.
Do you just start with the blank page, or do you have a vague idea where it's going, or it's just put the characters in there and let's see what they come up with?
I can give you a very recent example. So I'm working on a sequel to a book I wrote that came out last year called The 620 Man. And I thought that, I knew where it was going to be set, and I thought I knew what his role was going to be. And I wrote 25 pages and I didn't feel it. I just I'm not interested in these pages. How in the world can I expect a reader to be interested in these pages? So I just chucked them. And then I set it in a different location, gave him a different agenda and a different role to play. And I wrote 100 pages. And I got to 100 pages. I was like, it's just not there. This is not that I want it to be. So I set those pages aside. Then I walked away for a few days, and I came back and I looked at both sets of pages. And I thought, I like this from here. I like the location, because the geographic location was compelling, was atmospheric. It was a true character in its own right. I like that piece of it, not so much the other stuff. In the other set of pages, I like the role that I gave him. I like the perspective that I gave him. And I like the people that I was going to have surround him in this novel and all their baggage to a certain extent. So I sort of took some pieces from there that I found fascinating and chucked the rest. And then I put those two together, and it was like 3rd time's the charm. It was voila, this different location and a different angle of his role and the baggage and what he was going to be investigating all came together. And that's sometimes how it happens. I've tried outlining the book from A to Z, and it never works for me, because this is what happens. I outline it. I got this beautiful outline that I've proudly written, a month ago, and now I've got it here, and I sit down and I'm writing it. I'm like, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm not feeling any of this stuff, because how can I outline a whole novel when I've never spent a page of the novel with any of the characters? How do I even know what they're capable of? There might be one character in the outline I thought was going to lead the action, and all of a sudden I'm writing pages, and this other character is a lot more interesting. So flexibility and latitude is key for me. And I equate it to this. There are 2 ways to learn how to drive a Formula One car. You can read a book about it, or you can drive a Formula One car, and I can tell you the experiences are very different. I like to call it writing in the trenches. So writing an outline is it's a buffer. It's removed one step from what you're actually going to be doing. There's not a lot of urgency to an outline. There's not a lot of high stakes, because you can always, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, I can always finish that thought off when I get to the novel itself, right? But if you're in the novel itself, there's no backstop. There's no place to go other than right here. So the tension, the energy, the urgency are all heightened because I'm writing these scenes now where somebody's going to die, and I have to make the decision of who and what's going to happen after that. This is not an outline. This is game day. And my mind moves faster. I'm seeing it's almost like, when you play American football, Tom Brady drops back for a pass. You have 11 guys on the other side. All they want to do is knock his brains out, right? Is he going to be more into it that day, that second, than he is at practice when there's nothing bad that's going to happen to him? So the whole game slows down for him. He sees all 21 other players in the field and he's in this moment. That's the way I feel when I'm writing the novel. I'm in the moment and my decisions are better because of it.
Yeah, terrific. I'm going to look at one particular year in your career because I couldn't quite believe what I was reading in this particular case. And I'm going to need my glasses here because I want to get the facts right. In 2015, you had two books published, The Guilty and Memory Man. And The Guilty is a Will Roby novel, and The Memory Man is an Amos Decker novel. In 2014, you had two John Puller novels published. So at this period, you actually had three series going on. I have to say, I'm amazed at that. I mean, if I'm doing a short story at the same time as a novel, my mind is all over the place. Do you write simultaneously, or do you think, okay, well, I'll kind of put The Memory Man to bed for a couple of days, I'll work on The Guilty instead? Or
yeah, I do compartmentalize, and again, that's what I did when I was a lawyer because I had to juggle a lot of things, and these characters are so real to me. I'm their mom. I birthed them. They didn't exist before I created them, so I know everything about them. So I would never, confuse what Amos Decker does with the Will Roby or John Puller. Actually, these series sort of, reinvigorate me because I get to go back and visit people I haven't been with for a while. And the longer, frankly, the longer you do this, the greatest challenge for any writer is to remain passionate and fresh about their approach to writing. And there are a lot of writers who write the same character over and over again for many books, and that's terrific. And that stuff is really good. I have found, for me personally, that what keeps me fresh is to keep presenting challenges to me, to get out of my comfort zone, to build new worlds that I didn't know existed before, and to bring new characters to life. Because that's what really reignites my creative spirit. Instead of writing the same character over and over. I never want to get to the point where I've written 50 books about the same character, and I get to the point where all I'm really doing is just changing the names, and slicing the plot up a little bit. It's really the same read, but because all my juice is gone, I don't really care anymore. I never want to get to that point. So I've created all these series to make sure that I never will get to that point. And I think that's why I'll continue to write both standalones and come up with new characters. That's my way of staying fresh throughout the course of a long career.
Did your young adult novels help with that? Or was that something that you decided you definitely wanted to write for young people?
It was part and parcel of it. I'd read fantasy growing up. I was a Tolkien fan. I was a C.S. Lewis fan. I was a Lewis Carroll fan. In fantasy, I asked myself again a question I wanted to answer. Can I do this? Can I build a world from scratch that has nothing to do with reality? And I love writing those books. Nobody even knew I was writing the first one. I just wrote it because I felt so, it felt so compelling to me. And it took me, over 10 years to write the first one off and on. I started and stopped, threw pages away, started and stopped again. And when I sent it out to publishers, I didn't even use my real name. I used a pseudonym because I wanted them to buy the book, because of the book, the story, not because of my name attached to it. And again, that was another way for me to say, okay, Buckaroo, this is brand new. Scare yourself to death. Because as a writer, as a creative person, if you want to have the greatest antidote in the world to complacency, it's fear. Fear that you can't bring the magic again, because fear sharpens every instinct that you have. You will be as wound as tight as a clock because of it. That's not a bad thing, too, because heightened senses and perceptions drives really incredible stories, I've found.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think any of your adult themes feeded through into your young adult fiction?
They do. I was more preachy in my earlier books than I probably should have been, and I get that. But I write about the real world, so real world issues are going to come into my fiction. I can't avoid that. I just can't. I care too much about this stuff. When I was touring in the UK, right after the 2016 election, I vented across England, and Wales, and Scotland, and Ireland. I really did. And I told the audiences every stop I went to, and I went to like a dozen. I said, excuse me, I'm just going to vent for a little bit, if you don't mind, about what had just taken place in my country.
Yeah.
So that stuff, and I'm a very political person as well, because I know that politics ultimately will determine how we get to lead our lives or not. That's just the way the world works. So I like to both entertain and inform with my novels. And I think the earlier that young people start reading about important issues that they can comprehend and make good decisions about, the better. So even in the young adult series, you will find issues that probably creep into my adult fiction all the time. The abuse of power, people going after the outsider, the people who don't look like them, people who don't think like them or believe like them. That was strewn throughout that young adult fantasy novel. And there's always going to be evil, there's always going to be good, there's always going to be gray, the ones in between. And I just think that, that's why I'm so upset now that we're banning and burning books over here again.
Yeah.
It's like you're putting it under the guise of freedom and freedom of choice. There's no freedom of choice if you're telling people what they need to know. People need to know what they want to know, and you should allow them to go wherever they want to get that information from. My worry is that, people who don't read a lot of books, who don't read in general, and they get only their information from online sources or skewed sources, and then they go to the voting booth and they make really bad decisions, and the rest of us suffer because of it. That stuff isn't mostly all of my books, just because a lot of my books deal with government and politics and things like that. I'm not on the soapbox as much as I used to be, but the points are still there. I've gotten more subtle and about how I make them.
Yeah.
And if people want to use them and think about them, go for it.
Terrific. I was thinking very much about in Wormwood. One theme seems to be the world as you think it is not as you think it is. There is so much which you are not seeing, so much which you are not being told, and this is being kept from you. And I think this is a theme, and I think I can see it in both your adult work and from what I've read of your young adult work as well. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, it definitely is. And when I travel around the country, I live right outside of Washington, D.C. We are inundated. I read like 12 newspapers a day, magazines. I talk to people, in the government and outside the government, but who know things are going on, and issues that matter very deeply to me. And then I travel the country and I talk to people, and I find that many have no idea that any of this is actually happening. And I don't fault them for that, because they have their lives to live. They can't live in a political bubble and think about this stuff all the time. They have jobs, they have kids to raise, they have stuff to do, and I get that. But there needs to be at least a minimum level of knowledge and involvement in the process, again, because we live in a democracy that gives the voters the power to elect people, and we're not. And it's like anything else. I wouldn't want to be flying on a plane where a pilot, hasn't cracked an instruction book for 30 years, right? Because that could have dire consequences for the passengers. Same thing in a democracy. With these, we're giving a great power to the people, and they have to exercise that power, but there's no way to exercise it rationally and responsibly unless you understand what the issues are and what's actually going on in the world. And there's that disconnect there.
Yeah, we're getting back to libraries gave us power again. Okay, I'll call Gail back in a few minutes, but I'm going to have to finish with one question, which I know you will have been asked many, many times before. You're a young writer, you're starting out. If you could go back in time to your early 20s, what advice would you give to yourself?
Probably the biggest piece of advice, I wouldn't have written in total isolation. I didn't belong to any writers club. I didn't do any interaction with other writers. I didn't show people my stuff. I didn't talk about it. Nobody even knew I was writing all those years, other than my wife and my brother and my sister, not even my close friends. I would have interacted more. I would have joined some writers' clubs. I would have written stuff and given it to people and let them critique it, give me advice. I could read their stuff, do the same for them, create more of a community, be part of more of a community. Because obviously writing is a very solitary experience. You're sitting down in front of a pad of paper or computer screen and creating this stuff, and nobody else is around. It's just you and in your head. And I spent a lot of my time doing that. But early on, I think it probably would have been beneficial to me to have some support. When you're doing it by yourself, it's like all the bad stuff, all the rejections you're getting, it's only happening to me. Not to other writers. So if I had known that I was not alone in all of that, it probably would have been better for me psychologically.
It takes some courage, though, I think. The first person to read something you've created, you're very, very vulnerable when you do that. This is something I've worked on and created, and I don't know if it's any good because I'm so close to it. To give that to somebody else, it leaves you vulnerable, I think.
It does, but it also provides the greatest test and answer to the question is, are you meant to be a writer? So if you're meant to be a writer, if you're not meant to be a writer, here's what's going to happen. You write a story, you give it to a friend, or you send it out to try to sell it, and they just destroy it. This is a piece of crap, and blah, blah, blah. And for somebody who really is into writing because they may hate their day job, they want to sell the movie rights and retire, that one rejection would be a mortal wound, and they're just going to stop and give it up, So, but if you're really meant to be a writer and you want to be a writer truly for the right reasons, like you like telling stories, you love words, that rejection is a nick, and you bleed a little bit, but then the wound heals and you keep going. So that's the difference. So it's a really good litmus test. There's a lot of people out there who are, they want to be a writer. They say they want to, but they don't understand the gauntlet you have to go through. This is the most subjective business in the world, taking somebody else's ideas and telling them what you think about them. And a lot of rejections. So if one rejection from somebody you may not even know dissuades you from being a writer, it's probably a fact that you were not meant to be a writer.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call Gail back in and she can tell us what the public have been wanting to ask David.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. That was so comprehensive. You had so much to tell us there. Brilliant. There's an awful lot of lovely books on the internet here, David. It's lovely to see. There's a Robert Williams that says he loves the books and the TV series of Maxwell and King and Maxwell. So yeah, I'm sure he's grateful to be able to see you today. Now I've got some interesting questions, and I hope you can hear me because I've just been told that my internet connection is unstable. First one actually comes from Non-Tudor. She says, hi from Carnarvon. She's from the Welsh language magazine, and I apologise now for getting this wrong. I'm sure Philip can correct me. Golweg? Golweg? Golwg. Sorry, very English there, can't pronounce the Welsh. And she asks, may I ask, why did you want to support a small Welsh literary festival? Are small nations and cultures important to you? Thanks, by the way.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish we had millions of book festivals across the world. This is a place where people can come, talk about books, talk about writing, share ideas and opinions, share some humanity, some empathy, some sympathy. My philosophy has always been the more readers we have in the world, the better the world we have to live in. And this exchange of ideas and this support of writers and books is paramount if we want to have the sort of world that we want to live in, which is free and full of ideas and full of diversity. So book festivals, wherever they may be, small, medium, and large, It doesn't matter to me because it shows in Wales that people have an interest in books and reading, and they're interested in writing, they're interested in authors, and they want to have, a platform where those things can be discussed. And that's really important because that shows that people care about these things. I've always equated, books and reading to freedom. I don't think you can have one without the other, quite frankly. I know that you can have one, but not freedom by not having the other. So for me, supporting it, and the other point, I live in an ecosystem, a very specialized ecosystem. That's books, writers, readers, publishers. And if I don't support the ecosystem, just like any other ecosystem, if I fail in my duties to support the ecosystem, what happens to the ecosystem? It dies. So yeah, I'm an established writer. I don't need to tour anymore. I mean, I don't have to do events like this if I don't want to. But when I was first starting out, people out there supported me. I went to book festivals and book events. Booksellers supported me. They had me to come to their stores. They introduced me to readers. I signed books and I built an audience. So for me to shirk that duty, not just to them, but to my responsibility, this ecosystem, just like any other ecosystem, it's fragile. You think it will never fail, but I can guarantee you that if you think it can never fail, you're just taking the first step towards ensuring that one day it will fail. So I'm proud to be a part of this because I know how important it is. No matter how big or how small an event is, it's an event that has brought people together for a really important reason.
Yeah, we are very, very grateful to have you with us as Phil and I both on the organisation team, and we were absolutely cock-a-doop when you said yes. So thank you for coming. Next question comes from Tara Croxton. She says it's great to hear you talk about your books, and thank you. Can David provide some insight as a character, and could it include discovering his Welsh ancestry?
Characters for me, particularly if I'm doing a series, it's very important for me to know, is there going to be enough interesting information and material about this character, their backstory, that I can show some of in the first novel and then use that material going forward. So I like to call it sort of personal baggage that I build around each of my characters. I'll give you an example. Like Amos Decker, he has his perfect memory because of a traumatic brain injury. It's both a blessing and a curse. It's great to be able to remember everything, and it's also terrible to be able to remember everything. So we all have things we'd rather forget in our lives. He can't. Yeah. His family was murdered, so that's the albatross around his neck, and that has changed who he is completely. And going forward, I can then exploit that knowledge and that backstory on him in future books. So you have to. I'm not saying you have to make every character have trauma in their lives, but they have to have a real full life that you can then use in subsequent books. And we all have full lives. You just have to dig deeper on some people than on others. And I appreciate the fact that life is complicated, but what I always want to do is I want to throw my characters into a situation, and I might throw them into the water with an 80-pound stone around them. And I want to see the situation I put them in. Can they sink or can they swim? How are they going to respond to what I've asked them to do? And that also comes to motivation for your characters. If you're asking a character to do something extraordinary, the motivation has to equal the request. Human beings can do extraordinary things if they have the right motivation. If somebody lost $5 in a bet, that's probably not enough motivation for them to go into a bank with a gun to rob $30,000, from the bank. But if somebody has lost a loved one, if somebody has lost something really important, that can motivate them to do something they never would have imagined themselves doing before. And so many great characters are born from that one simple question. If I put you like this is what I make you, what do you make of it? And then off and running. And you have pretty much what I try to do is in the first 20 or 30 pages of a novel, I try to pack as much in there, the meat in there that I need for the rest of the novel to flow from those things that I've already presented to you in the first 20 pages. So you're never going to sit down to a page and go, gee, where do I go now? All you have to do is look back and say, this one plot line provided a subplot line, provided 11 things that I can write about, and it just keeps growing. At the end of the book, you're like, okay, I have to cut some of it out because I have too much to do. But it's almost like dropping one pebble in to calm water, and the ripples go out, and all of a sudden you have more ripples than you'll ever need. And so characters, you have to remember, you can't connect with a reader via plot, not on a human level. You connect with readers on a visceral human level through your characters. That's who they're going to care about. You can put them into a really cool plot. If the characters are not interesting, it's not going to matter how cool the plot is, because nobody's going to read the book. Because they're going to be like, I just don't care about what you die, I don't care.
Yes, we've all read those books at some point.
Yeah.
Next question is, we all have to write and then we have to edit and revise. Where is your passion? Is it with the first draft, or is it in that editing process where you polish everything and make sure everybody has the next page to turn to?
For me,
my connection gone?
No, it's okay. You broke up a bit there, but we got the question. Yes, so
I got the question.
First draft or editing? Yes, it's
yeah.
The editing is really where the book comes alive, and where I become the most focused I'm ever going to be during the editing process. The first draft is a blob of clay. The editing is where you take your chisel and really make it into a novel. There's a library here in the United States where they have first draft manuscripts of famous novels, and then and they also have obviously the final version of the novel, and it's amazing to see the difference between the two. How you had this, and then you had this, and this came from that, and it's just by being so in the moment, so in the story as you're going through. And for me, it's mostly cutting. As I've gotten older and I've written more books, if I used to say it in 100 words, I try my best to say it in 10 now, because 100 is garbled, isn't diluted, and it's not powerful. 10, you have to ask yourself, has this word deserved and earned the right to be in the manuscript? If it hasn't, kick it out. The most famous American political speech of all time is Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's 360 words long. It took Lincoln 2.5 minutes to speak it at Gettysburg. Because if you read that speech, every word in that speech had earned the right to be in it. So your job is to make sure that no word that hasn't earned that right stays in your manuscript, because it's only a parasite at that moment. It only dilutes the power of what you're trying to say. So for me, the editing is where I live. That's where the pens come out. And I only write in cursive when I'm doing my edits. I think better in cursive writing, my joined up writing. And that's where the meat of what I've taken, in the first draft actually comes to resemble a novel. And if you're gonna bring your gifts and your energy and your inspiration anywhere, make sure you bring it at that phase.
okay. Gail, can you hear us? Do we have any more questions, Gail? Okay, if we've lost you, Gail, and I hope we haven't, I think it's time for one very last brief question, because we do have to finish on time. David, is there a novel you wish you had written?
Oh my God! There are. It's just, I guess, one of my favorite writers growing up in college was
lovely. We've got a couple more minutes. I believe. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Well,
you.
we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. So the last thing was.
We've lost you again, Gail.
Well, I'll answer your question. I'm on the board of the Mark Twain House. I'm a Twainiac. That's what they call us. We Mark Twain So I guess one book I wish I had written was Huckleberry Finn, because that was one of the most courageous books ever written. I mean, he wrote that book, it came out in 1876, I think, and he was saying things today, back then, and writing things back then that people are afraid to write about today, in 2023. So it was quite courageous, and I identify with Twain in a lot of ways, and so that was a seminal novel, and one that was courageous. And I guess being a courageous writer, there are other things in life. There are far fewer things in life that I would rather be. A courageous writer is certainly right at the top.
Absolutely, absolutely. Gail, do we have you back again? Okay, if we can't hear you, Gail, then I think it is 8 o'clock, and I think, unfortunately, that really is all we do have time for. David, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a really fascinating, very pleasant, very easy conversation. Douglas Skelton said to me, you were a great interviewee. So thanks for being our great interviewee at Gwyl Crime Cymru 20.
I hope you do. Can you hear me?
We can hear you again now, Gail. You're very, very
no, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I hope the rest of the festival goes great, and I applaud you for doing it.
Thank you, David, if you can hear us.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Enjoy the festival.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye. Can you hear me, Phil?
I can hear you, Gail.
Oh, sorry. My phone just completely went off.
Don't worry.
But that was actually